What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Offside and Penalties podcast. I'm Joseph. I'm happy that you're here. We got a lot to talk about today. This is an NFL episode. I'm recording this November 4th. One notable thing about November 4th, happy birthday, Mom. Love you. See you in a bit. Second most notable thing about November 4th is it was the NFL trade deadline, and we're here. A lot went down today. The Jets were very involved. The Cowboys were very involved, as we kind of expected they would be. A lot to talk about, and I want to get into what we saw in Week 9. So a big episode. Week 9 was crazy this week, one of the crazier weeks of the year. The NFL's in such a crazy spot right now. I have no clue who's good, who's bad, but we got a lot to talk about, and we're going to start with the trade deadline, and then we'll get into some of these other games that went down, and maybe some of the games will correlate with some of the trades that went down, and I'll get into that. Stacked episode today. I appreciate you being here. And let's jump into the trade deadline. So the trade deadline finished up at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern on November 4th today, Tuesday. And a lot went down. And let's start with the two Jets trades. And they were big ones. Coming into the trade deadline, we thought, okay, Jermaine Johnson was probably going to get traded by the Jets. There were some rumblings for some other players, but we really thought it was going to primarily be Jermaine Johnson, maybe Will McDonald. They ended up trading their two cornerstones, or who had been the cornerstones of the defense. Earlier today, this morning, it got announced that they traded Sauce Gardner to the Indianapolis Colts for Adonai Mitchell, wide receiver Adonai Mitchell, and 2 firsts, one in 2026, one in 2027. Massive trade. This was something that I didn't really think was going to happen. A lot of other people didn't think this was going to happen. We knew the Jets would be sellers at the deadline. For them to trade away Sauce Gardner, who's kind of been their cornerstone of their defense and one of their two cornerstones of their team with Garrett Wilson, was wild. But they got 2 firsts and a talented young receiver in return. I thought this was a slam dunk trade for the Jets. I really did. And I thought it made sense for Indy. I get it. Chris Ballard, Indianapolis Colts GM, is usually never this aggressive. So for him to trade 2 firsts and a young wide receiver for a corner was very surprising to me. They needed it because their secondary had been getting torched. They have Charvarius Ward, but Charvarius Ward got hurt pregame and went on IR with a pretty bad concussion. He'll be back later in the year, we presume. Pairing Charvarius Ward, Sauce Gardner, and having Kenny Moore in the slot, we're looking at this as one of the best secondaries in the league in Indianapolis. So I thought this trade made a lot of sense for Indianapolis. It was a need. Now they're really sacrificing their future, which tells me and tells us that, hey, Indianapolis believes in this roster. They believe that they are Super Bowl contenders, and making a move like this is reflective of it. I'll get into their loss against the Steelers later in the episode, but this was a good trade for Indianapolis, but I thought this was an A+ slam dunk for the Jets. Look, Sauce Gardner is still in his prime, right? But as we see with corners are one of those positions that the primes don't last as long as other positions do, right? It's not necessarily as short as running backs' primes are, but, we see corners, fall off. Jalen Ramsey was at the top of his game not too long ago, and it just feels like, Jalen Ramsey's definitely taken a couple steps backwards. If you remember, back a while back, the Rams gave up a similar haul for Jalen Ramsey to the Jaguars, and Jalen Ramsey obviously was a part of that Super Bowl winning defense. So maybe that's how Indianapolis views the Sauce Gardner trade. But for the Jets, right, you've got 1 win on the year. It's very clear you're not contending. I'm not one to trade away young superstars in their primes like Sauce Gardner, but to get 2 firsts and a young wide receiver, I think this is an A+. I think if you are going to trade a player like Sauce Gardner, you do it for the haul that they got. And I think it was just an unbelievable trade for the Jets. To get this type of value, they're really setting up their future. And they're really saying, hey, we understand right now this roster is not it. Right now we're not going to win games. I think the Jets, who are an organization that makes a lot of questionable decisions, I think this was one of their better decisions in a while. Then later on Tuesday, they traded Quinnen Williams, their other cornerstone on defense, to the Dallas Cowboys. Jerry Jones yesterday on Monday did, in typical Jerry Jones fashion, went on a radio show and talked about, we have a trade lined up, it's going to be a big one. And everyone was like, oh boy, because I texted my buddy Jack, Shout out Jack, big Cowboys fan. I texted him, this is going to be like another like Trey Lance or Jonathan Mingo trade where they're going to give up a mid-round pick for some like player that was good coming out of college but has massively underperformed in the pros. They traded for Logan Wilson earlier today. Many thought that was the big trade Jerry was talking about. No. They went out and got Quinnen Williams, an elite defensive tackle in the NFL. They traded Mozzie Smith, who was their former first-round pick, complete bust, has not panned out in the NFL, a 2026 second-round pick, and a 2027 first-round pick for Quinnen Williams. So this trade, to me, whereas I like the Sauce Gardner trade for the Colts a lot, I like this trade for the Cowboys more than I like that trade for the Colts. The Cowboys traded away a cornerstone. They traded away Micah Parsons, one of the best defensive players in the league, one of the best players in the league. Quinnen Williams is not Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons is younger. Micah Parsons is better at a more crucial position. But what this tells me, this wasn't a trade just for the short term. I think we all know the Cowboys aren't going to make the playoffs with how loaded this NFC is this year. And this one trade, plus the Logan Wilson trade, which I'll talk about briefly, those two trades don't elevate the Cowboys defense to go from how god-awful it's been to being a good defense. It just doesn't. But Quinnen Williams is still in his prime. This is a future building trade, right? This is a trade where like, hey, we're bringing you in this year, and we know we'll have you we'll have you next year and other years, and hopefully the defense elsewhere is in a better spot, but we know that we're reinforcing our defensive line. I think this was a good trade for the Cowboys. I really do. I also think it was an unbelievable trade for the Jets because, like I said with Sauce Gardner, if you're going to trade away a player like Quinnen Williams, getting a second-round pick and a first-round pick is about as good of a haul as you can get. And I'm seeing many draft scouts saying that the 2027 draft class is much better than this upcoming 2026 draft class. And if that's the case, they got a 2027 first from the Cowboys instead of a first this upcoming draft, which is really telling. The one thing I didn't love about this trade, and this is why, whereas I thought, this was a great trade for the Cowboys, I wouldn't put it as an A+ trade. I'd put it as like an A- trade. And the only reason I say that is it sounds like the first round pick that is going to the Jets in 2027 is the Cowboys first rounder, not a Packers first rounder from that Micah Parsons trade. And I think that's a big difference because I think we'll talk about the Packers a little later and their loss against Carolina. The Packers first is way less valuable than the Cowboys first. I think that Cowboys first, worst case scenario, is going to be in like the low 20s, like pick 20, pick 21. Realistically, it's probably going to be in between pick 10 and 20. That Green Bay first is going to be back of the first round. We're talking pick 26 to 32, depending on if you think the Packers are Super Bowl contenders or not. So the fact that the Jets got the Cowboys first instead of the Packers first, that's a big difference. That's like a 10 to 15 pick difference where that pick is probably going to be in 2027. So really good on the Jets. I thought they crushed at this deadline. I think teams too often build a roster and they hang on to that roster. And I think when you know it's not going right, you got to blow it up and start this rebuild as soon as possible. That's why the Saints have been so mediocre for so long, right, in recent years. It's because they've always had this roster that just couldn't quite get there, but they refused to finally sell and do the rebuild until this last year. I'm glad that the Jets are getting ahead of it, and I've, on this podcast, criticized Woody Johnson and the Jets organization a ton. This was an A+ trade deadline for them. Even though they traded away two really, really talented players on defense, a defense that had already been struggling this year, they got as good of a haul for both of them as you could get. And the players that they were rumored to be shopping, like linebacker Quincy Williams, the brother of Quinnen Williams, edge rusher Will McDonald, edge rusher Jermaine Johnson, right, who are young, good players as well, they didn't budge. They said, this is our value. This is what we want. If we're not going to get that, we're going to hold on to them. And I think that's great. I think that's exactly what you need to do. It's not like those three guys are aging vets. Those are young players. So trade them if you can get maximum value. If you can't, hold on to them because they'll be valuable in the future. A+ trade deadline for the Jets. The Colts, that was a good trade for them. They're in win-now mode. And the Cowboys, that was a good trade for them. Those were two trades that really made sense for both parties. And I was really happy to see both those trades go down. Moving on from the Jets, Miami, this was a couple days ago. They fired their GM, Chris Greer, after that loss to Baltimore on Thursday night. New GM comes in, trades Jalen Phillips, their young, talented edge rusher, to the Eagles for a 2026 third-round pick. This is such a good trade for Philly. Their pass rush has really not been what they've needed it to be, especially on the edge this year. They brought Brandon Graham out of retirement. That doesn't really move the needle for me. This does. Jalen Phillips is a really talented young edge rusher. He's had a little bit of an injury history with Achilles and stuff, but it was a desperate need for Philly. They're clearly still Super Bowl contenders. They're clearly still in win now mode. That was an A-plus trade for Philly. It's a third-round pick. I get it. That's pretty good value for Miami, but that was an A-plus trade. For Miami, I really would have rathered them see if they were going to trade a guy on defense. I think there were three guys that were floating out there. It was, besides Jalen Waddle on the other side of the ball, which they were wise to keep him unless they got a massive haul for him. The three guys on defense they were rumored to be shopping were Jalen Phillips, who obviously got traded to Philly, Bradley Chubb, another edge rusher, and Minkah Fitzpatrick. I thought of those three guys, the one that you'd be more inclined to keep was Jalen Phillips, and they traded Jalen Phillips to the Eagles. I get it. You got good value for him. I really would have loved to see them because Minkah and Chubb aren't exactly as young as Jalen Phillips are, and it's clear Miami's headed towards a rebuild. If you're going to trade certain guys and hold other guys, you'd rather hold the young guys and trade the vets. They kind of did the opposite. I don't know what the contract situations are like with all three of those guys, but, Miami, it was good value, but I would have rather them see, if they could have made values for slightly lesser value for Bradley Chubb, Minkah Fitzpatrick, and held on to Jalen Phillips, I think that would have been way better. My favorite, not my favorite, because I'm a 49er fan and this horrifies me, my favorite trade in terms of like A++ was Seattle trading for Rashid Shaheed, the speedster wide receiver out of New Orleans. They gave up a 2026 fourth and a 2026 fifth for Rashid Shaheed. This scares the living crap out of me as a 49ers fan. Seeing what Seattle just did to Washington on Sunday Night Football, just abused them. Seeing what Seattle's done a whole year to people, right? Their offense is so built. Everyone thinks, it's this run game offense, and they do pound the rock. They're not exactly an effective running team. What makes them so effective is these explosive passing plays down the field. And they just got one of the best deep threats in the league. Rashid Shaheed isn't like an elite wide receiver. He's an elite deep threat. He's got speed that takes the top off the defense. The way that Sam Darnold has thrown his deep balls this year and the way that their offense has functioned with these downfield passes, and they just added Rashid Shaheed. So you're telling me you're going to have JSN, Cooper Kupp, and then you're going to have Shaheed taking the top off the defense, along with Torrey Horton, a promising young rookie who's also done a little bit of that. That's horrifying, dude. That was A+++ trade for Seattle. And Seattle just looked like Super Bowl contenders to me. And I'll touch on them a little later when I cover their game against Washington, but just unbelievable trade for Seattle. The other notable trade, Las Vegas, it had been rumored for a while. They traded wide receiver Jacoby Myers to the Jags for a 2026 fourth, 2026 sixth. Look, Jacoby Myers isn't, Jacoby Myers still has some gas in the tank. He isn't exactly a wide receiver that moves the needle, but he's a starting, solid possession receiver right away. He can separate. And this is good timing because Brian Thomas is a little banged up and has underperformed a little bit. Travis Hunter just got put on IR with a non-contact injury at practice, and that was right as Travis Hunter was getting, involved in the offense. So that was unfortunate timing for Jacksonville with the Hunter injury. They went and make this move. It's another move that shows Jacksonville feels that they can compete. The one thing about these trades, right, besides Dallas, Indy, Philly, Seattle, and Jacksonville, all four of these moves that these respective teams have made shows me that, hey, these teams believe they can compete, right? And coming off of a week where we saw a bunch of underdogs win, a bunch of surprising results, it's clear to me and it's clear to NFL fans around the world that this is the most wide open the NFL has been. I have zero clue who's coming out of both conferences right now. Usually by this time of year, we have a favorite. I was talking a week ago or 2 weeks ago, how I thought it was Indianapolis and KC coming out of the AFC. Fast forward a couple weeks, both those teams have lost games, and now all of a sudden I'm like, holy crap, who's coming out of the AFC? Who's coming out of the NFC? No clue, but what I will say is these moves by Indy, Philly, Seattle, and Jacksonville show that, hey, they think the NFL is wide open. They're making moves to win now. Some other moves I want to touch on very briefly. Tennessee traded Draymond Jones to the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens needed defensive line help. Draymond Jones is a very good defensive lineman. That'll help them as they're winning games, hoping to climb back into AFC playoff contention. Logan Wilson to the Cowboys, the former Cincy linebacker. This doesn't move the needle for me. Logan Wilson is on the other worst defense in the league. Cincy and Dallas by far have the two worst defenses, and Wilson got benched. I think it's a very low-risk move for Dallas because they didn't give up much for him and, whatever. But it doesn't move the needle for me. Jair Alexander got traded to the Eagles a couple days ago. I could care less about that trade. Jair, at this point in his career, is so unbelievably washed. But Phillies had real issues at that outside corner spot, right, between Keely Ringo and Adoree Jackson. So I think bringing in a corner, they didn't give much for him. It was a 7-6 pick swap. You know what? That's fine. Take your shot. See if it works. If not, he'll be a healthy and active like he was in Baltimore. And then just before the deadline, Trevor Penning, the former first-round offensive lineman from New Orleans, got traded to the Chargers. This is coming off of Joe Alt's injury. This is a bigger move than people think. The Chargers offense so heavily depends on Joe Alt. Joe Alt is done for the year after they lost Rashawn Slater before the season. Just brutal to have two cornerstone tackles and both of them suffer season-ending injuries. Trevor Penning is not Rashawn Slater and he is not Joe Alt, but this does help their offensive line a little bit, brings in a new face. I don't know if Penning will start right away or not, but whether he's inside or outside, it helps the Chargers offensive line a little bit. That's going to need all the help they can get. And that was the trade deadline. Some interesting storylines besides the trades that happened. San Francisco was very, very rumored to be trading for a defensive lineman. They didn't. A little disappointed in that as a 49er fan, but it is what it is. I think the Niners are such a young team and they need their pick so much. If they were looking at a Jermaine Johnson and the Jets said, we want a second, I'm like, okay, that's fine. Don't do it. It's going to be rough for the Niners. They lost their first-round pick, Micah Williams, this week. Their defensive line has been just unbelievably battered by injuries, like the whole team has, but especially the offensive line. Or the defensive line, excuse me. So that was interesting. There were some other players, like Breece Hall was heavily rumored to be getting traded from the Jets. He didn't. I understand why he didn't. It sounded like the Jets were asking for a third or a fourth. I would not give that up because Breece Hall is going to be a free agent after this year. He's going to want a long-term extension. One of my boys, Ethan, Chiefs fan, was very disappointed the Chiefs didn't trade for him. I just don't think a third-round pick justifies a half a season of Breece Hall if you're not planning on extending him long-term. And it seemed like KC doesn't really have the checkbook to be able to pay a running back long-term. Their roster really isn't set up that way. So I understood that. And that was the trade deadline. A lot of big trades went down. It was a little more eventful than I thought it was. Thank you to the New York Jets for that one. And some really, really big names got traded. Now let's go back a little further. Let's talk Week 9. I won't spend a ton of time on these games because we're a couple days removed, and obviously these trades kind of changed our outlook on the league. But there's some games we're talking about. This was a wild Week 9. I think six underdogs won their games this week, which is absolutely wild. A ton of upsets. Maybe the game of the year, and that's what we'll start with. The 5-3 Chicago Bears beat the 3-6 Cincinnati Bengals 47-42. What a wild game this was. Very high scoring, very close. Chicago pulled away. Then Cincy kept battling back. They got the onside kick, scored the go-ahead touchdown, and then all Cincy needed was one stop. And I'll give Caleb Williams credit. I have been very hard on him in the last week or so. Made an unbelievable throw down the seam to Colson Loveland, who broke a tackle. Zero wrap-up skills from Jordan Battle, the Cincinnati safety. Cincy's defense, I've criticized Dallas's defense very, very heavily this year. I have not criticized Cincy's defense enough. I really wish this is the year I wanted to see Cowboys-Bengals because the final score of that game would have been 70-68. It would have been wild. That game would have been so fun. Those two defenses just can't do anything. Flacco has been an absolute godsend for the Bengals, an absolute godsend. But it's just one of those things, man, that no matter how good the offense can play, if the defense can't get a stop, it can't matter. They've scored, 40-plus points in back-to-back weeks, or a ridiculous amount of points in back-to-back weeks, and lost both the games. At this point, they're 3-6. They're probably in too big of a hole to make the playoffs right now. I mean, if we're looking at KC, if KC right now is the 8 seed, Cincinnati at 3-6 is not making the playoffs. Maybe when Burrow gets back, they win some games and they just miss again like they did last year. But I think that this and the Jets loss were the nails in the coffin. Both very winnable games. Your offense put up an unbelievable amount of points. Special teams contributed, and your defense just can't buy a stop, can't wrap up. That's how it is. And you know what? I'll give the Bears credit. I was very harsh on Caleb Williams. I was very harsh on the Bears. These types of games are the ones that Chicago always lost before Ben Johnson took over. Ben Johnson is clearly making an impact. He's been exactly what we've wanted him to be as the head coach of the Chicago Bears. So props to Chicago for pulling that one out. Had to go through a lot of adversity. Everyone's going to talk down on the Bengals defense and everything, but it took an unbelievable effort out of Chicago to win that game, and that's what they got. Steelers. This was crazy that this game went this way. Steelers 5-3 beat the 7-2 Colts 27-20 in Pittsburgh. This was the one result I thought the way it was looking for Pittsburgh coming into this week. Back-to-back tough losses. Their defense couldn't buy a stop. They're playing one of the hottest offenses in the league. And the Steelers' defense looked like it returned to form. They forced 6 turnovers, right? Daniel Jones was looking like the Daniel Jones of old. He wasn't looking like this new Indiana Jones persona that he's put on. So really, really good quality win for the Steelers. And my one takeaway from this game, and we'll only be able to know in the coming weeks, was this game indicative of Steelers figuring some stuff out on defense, or was this indicative of the Colts not being the team we were kind of thinking they were going to be? I'm not sure. I'm really not, because it's very possible that Indianapolis is a dome/nice weather team, right? They'd only played one game outdoors the entire year, and that was in sunny Tennessee, like week 2, right? All their other games have been in LA or been in Indianapolis under the dome, right? It's weird because how good their O-line and how good their running game is, you'd think it'd translate to cold weather, to outdoor games in like Pittsburgh and the Midwest. It's to be determined. I don't know yet. I don't know. Maybe this was just an off game. Some of the turnovers were bad. Daniel Jones had a couple bad turnovers. Some of the turnovers were just unlucky, tip balls, whatever. So the verdict is out on Indianapolis. While they were looking like a surefire, like maybe locking up the 1 seed in the AFC, now they've come back to earth a little bit. We got to see how they respond in these next couple of weeks. They're playing in Berlin, Germany this week against Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see how they bounce back in that one. And for the Steelers, if the defense plays like this, they're going to be the Steelers that we thought they were going to be. They're going to be a better version than they'd looked the last couple of weeks, and they were going to be that team that was controlling first place. So we'll see. We'll see on that one. The Steelers' defense looked really, really good, very opportunistic, a lot of turnovers. T.J. Watt is still that dude. So very, very fun game. Steelers get the win. They move to 5-3, and they're not just folding the division to Baltimore. They're still fighting. They're still winning games. Another surprise upset. Another underdog win in a game. The Minnesota Vikings, man, 4-4 now after they beat the now 5-3 Lions in Detroit. 27-24 was the final score of that one. We've been so used to Carson Wentz. We haven't seen J.J. McCarthy since early September. He hadn't started a game since week 2. They gave him a lot of time to come back. And many people thought, the reason they're giving him so much time was because maybe they felt like Wentz was just the better option. Maybe they just thought that Carson Wentz was the better option for the Vikings. It had become clear in recent weeks, especially with Wentz's injury, with his, torn labrum or something, that wasn't the case. They just gave McCarthy plenty of time to come back, and man, he looked really, really good. Even dealing with Aiden Hutchinson, dealing with some pressure, he looked better than he did in most of that Chicago game, better than he did in that Atlanta game, week 2. Those are the only 2 games he played this year. So really good by McCarthy. And look, the Vikings defense was dealing. Brian Flores had Goff in hell the entire game. He was sending unbelievable blitzes, and Goff really struggled with the pressure. And that's a weakness that, the Lions will forever have as long as Jared Goff is their quarterback. Jared Goff has proven that he's a really high caliber starting quarterback in this league, but he's just not mobile. And when you send these exotic blitzes at him like Brian Flores did, and you're not letting him just get the ball out cleanly, it really, really does decrease the level of that Lions offense. They were really struggling all day. There was a special teams miscue when Minnesota blocked a field goal. That really would have changed the tide of the game. So, this game is just another game where I'm just like, wow, the NFC is so deep and so stacked, and there's like 9 or 10 teams that like could be playoff caliber any other year. And it's just like this year, it's just tough. I mean, the entire NFC North. We just saw the Vikings win. We saw the Bears win. We know the Lions and Packers, even though they both lost this week. It's like this conference is unbelievable. Like there's 3 teams in the NFC West that could be playoff teams. There's 4 teams in the NFC North that could be playoff teams. There's 1 or 2 teams in the NFC South. Let's talk about Carolina here in a second. And then in the East, you've got Philly. So this is a really deep conference this year. This is a really wide open league, but the NFC, I've talked about it. It's just, it could look so dramatically different 2 weeks from now, a month from now. So I'm excited to see it play out. I was just talking about it. Let's go to Lambeau. The Packers are now 5-2-1. They fell to the now 5-4 Carolina Panthers. Would you look at that? 16-13. I want to victory lap this a little bit. I caught a lot of flack when I took the Steelers to beat the Packers, right? And then on this podcast, in my preview pod for Week 9, I said I thought this would be a close competitive game. The fact that Green Bay was 13.5-point favorites in this game was absolutely wild to me. And this game showed me kind of what I'd been speculating about Green Bay, and I think I've got Green Bay figured out. I think Green Bay plays to the level of their opponents because some of their wins have been against very impressive teams, right? That was Washington with Jaden Daniels back earlier in the year. That was Detroit out the gate. That was Pittsburgh. Their offense showed up against Dallas. Their defense didn't. But then they play these like mediocre teams that don't put up much points, like Cleveland earlier in the year, Carolina here, and they just don't show up. And it's just inconsistency. In some games, Jordan Love looks like Superman, and then that throw on that 4th down, that might be the single worst throw. And you guys know what I'm talking about. You said because the Panthers DB dropped it looked like a punt return. It was just right in his lap, and he could have ran a long way. Jordan Love is just so hot and cold. The Packers are so hot and cold. Someone in my Instagram comment section said, every team's hot and cold. I'm like, yeah, but not like this team. Like, it's crazy how they go 1 week from going to Pittsburgh, lights out, to now they're back home playing a Carolina team who just got walloped by Buffalo, and they can't score any points. It's wild to me. I think they just play to the level of their opponents. And they have these big games, they show up, they play these good teams really well, but then like they play the Browns and the Panthers, and yeah. But I want to give Carolina their flowers nonetheless. Even though I'm talking about Carolina as some bad team, they're 5-4, and they've got a formula. Because a lot of their wins this year, Bryce Young hasn't been putting up crazy stats at quarterback, right? Bryce Young had a pretty bad pick earlier in this game in like the first or second quarter. But they've got this formula where with Rico Dowdle, they run the ball really well. He had 130-2 on the ground today. And then they play good defense, right? In years past, we've thought of Carolina's defense as really bad, and their run defense is still not great. But their pass defense is like legit. J.C. Horn's a legit corner. Mike Jackson on the other side's a really good corner. He's the one who dropped that pick in the end zone. They've got Trayvon Moehrig. The Panthers defense in the Panthers run game, right? That's a formula as old as time in the NFL. And if they can continue to rely on Rico Dowdle on the ground, continue to play good defense and stifle their opponents, similar to how they stifled Green Bay in this game, they stifled Atlanta earlier in the year, I think the Panthers, they would be a legit NFC contender if the NFC wasn't so deep this year. That's what I'm talking about. Is Carolina's 5-4, and right now, what are they, like the 9 or 10 seed in the NFC? Like, that's wild. But I want to give them their flowers, but I also just think Green Bay is just too inconsistent. And maybe the biggest storyline coming out of this game is Tucker Kraft, who I absolutely adore as a player. He reminds me of an old rookie, young George Kittle. Tore his ACL in this game. That might seriously affect their offense, because the one thing about under this LaFleur era, since they shipped away Devontae Adams, this Green Bay offense has never really truly had like a number one target, right? It's always been through the run game, through Jacobs. It used to be Aaron Jones. Now Tucker Kraft kind of rose to be that number one target. They don't have him. Who in the wide receiver room is going to step up? Christian Watson's coming off of an ACL, right? He's in his second or third game back. Matthew Golden, the first-round rookie, hasn't shown enough to prove he can be that number one. Romeo Doubs has looked pretty good this year. Is he a number one? I don't know. The Packers might have some issues. This Tucker Kraft thing could really complicate it for them, and they're lucky because that team that they beat earlier in the year that looked like they were going to keep pace with them, the Lions, lost today. So I don't know, man. Green Bay, it's sketchy. Now they play Philly on Monday night. This is not a good look for Green Bay, and they just play to the level of their opponents. If they play good teams, they show up. If they play teams they should beat, they just stoop to their level, and they make these games way closer than they should be, or they lose them like they did against Cleveland and Carolina. And, you know, if they play like this, if Jordan Love plays like this and they don't have Tucker Kraft, what's going to happen? What is Green Bay going to be? Are they going to even win their division? I don't know, but this team is just very hot and cold. They play to their opponent's level, and that's that, man. Game of the week, the one that we were all talking about, the one that I talked a lot about on the preview pod, and I didn't think Buffalo would win. They were home underdogs, and they got it done. They beat the Chiefs 28-21. I said it coming in. Whoever lost this game, it would be really complicated rest of the year to secure their division, secure home field advantage in the playoffs even. Chiefs are now 5-4 coming off of this win. And now they're 2 games behind Denver. They still play Denver twice this year, once in a couple weeks and then once on Christmas Day. And they're 1 game behind LA, who already beat them earlier in the year, right? And obviously LA's dealing with their injuries and they've shown weaknesses this year. But, regardless, because of some of these Chiefs losses, Denver has a somewhat favorable schedule. They still play KC twice, but they still have to play the Raiders twice. They play a beat-up Washington team. The Broncos, man, are in the driver's seat in this division right now. They are. And the thing that complicates it a little bit for them is the fact that the Chargers, beat them earlier in the year in kind of what was a dud game. But Denver's really in the driver's seat in the NFC West right now after this KC loss. And to be 2 games behind Denver, 1 game behind the Chargers, who you already lost to week 1 this year, everyone knows KC will be okay. Everyone knows when it comes playoff time, KC will be favored to win their games just because they've proven it year in and year out. But it's hard to look at this KC team right now and look at the outlook the rest of the year and think, they're not going to be the 1. They're not going to be the 2 in the AFC. There's a chance they don't even win their division for the first time in forever. And if they don't, we've seen KC, they did it a couple years ago where they went on the road in the playoffs and beat 2 teams. They beat Baltimore. But, what happens? I don't know what happens if KC is a wildcard team and they have to go on the road 3 straight games in the playoffs. I mean, we've never seen them do that before. And maybe Mahomes and Reed prove us all wrong again, but it's just going to be, I don't know, man. I really don't know. On the statement, on the other side, this was a statement for Buffalo. This was a statement win for the Buffalo Bills. A team that lost 2 games to New England and Atlanta where, frankly, they looked bad and their defense looked atrocious. Their defense came to play this game. They really put a ton of pressure on Mahomes. The Chiefs didn't run the ball as effectively as we thought they would. Those 2 losses before the bye were clearly just a rough stretch because after what they just did to Carolina, who's proven they're a competent team, and what they just did to KC, Buffalo's still Buffalo, and every team goes through down stretches, right? The NFL is competitive. This isn't like college football. This isn't like the NBA. Any team can be any team any given week. And Buffalo lost 2 games on primetime before they came out of the bye. They walloped Carolina, and now they just had a really good win against KC, in which the defense looked so much better. So really, really, really good statement win for the Buffalo Bills here. And for the Chiefs, like I talked about, we'll see rest of the year. It might be a tough outlook. You still get 2 games against Denver, 1 against LA. You play the Colts once this year, but they have a bye week. We know how Andy Reid is coming off of the bye, so they have a bye this week, and we'll see how they come back from it. The Sunday nighter, two different stories from this one. One good, one very, very bad. The Seahawks just kind of used and abused the Commanders on Sunday Night Football in Washington, 38-14. The Seahawks are 6-2 now. The Commanders are 3-6. Let's start with the bad, and then we'll get to the good. The bad is Washington. This is it. Their season's over, man. It is. Jaden Daniels dislocated his left elbow. Pretty gruesome injury. There's rumors he could be back. They're not. They're not going to win enough games in the meantime. They lost. Terry McLaurin's still hurt. They lost other guys. Marshawn Lattimore tore his ACL. Luke McCaffrey looks like he's going to be done for a while. They've just really gotten beat up by injuries, and they really made some moves this offseason to compete for the NFC, to compete for a Super Bowl. In doing that, making those moves like Laramie Tunsil, like Debo, their roster got considerably older. And now that it's backfired on them, they're in a tough spot. Because now, when last year they're in the NFC Championship, we're thinking of Washington as going to be threats in the NFC for years to come. They're probably next year's probably going to need to be kind of like a mini transition year to get that roster younger again. Jaden Daniels is hurt. Terry's still there, but Terry's, not getting any younger. It's just an aging roster right now, and It's tough. And I thought they'd be sellers at the trade deadline, but they weren't. And yeah, this is not a great look for Washington the rest of the year, especially with this Daniels injury and just complete coaching malpractice by Dan Quinn to keep Jaden Daniels in the game. I know he feels bad about it. I saw his press conference today or Monday where he just said, complete mistake, and he owned up to it. I agree, but you can't when you're down that much and you have your franchise quarterback, because even though it's not his throwing arm, and even though if you're going to have a brutal injury, you'd rather it be your non-throwing arm rather than, an Achilles or an ACL or something with your throwing arm. This is still an injury to your franchise guy who's in his second year in the NFL. You want this guy to be your franchise starter for 15 years, and putting him in compromised positions like this, just not a good idea at all. On the flip side, Seattle is going to be so scary in the playoffs. This team is unbelievable. Right now, if you put a gun to my head and said, pick a team that you think is going to win the NFC this year, I think after 9 weeks, I'm taking the Seattle Seahawks, man. After 9 weeks, I think the Seattle Seahawks are my pick to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. And I hate that because I'm a 49er fan, but their defense is so elite, especially up front. And in the secondary, they got Devin Witherspoon back. They've got Tariq Woolen isn't playing just because they've got other DBs who have just been playing better, And then on the offensive side of the ball, it's just such a well-oiled machine right now. They're not running the ball particularly well at all. This team, it's a Kubiak offense. They're running the ball, not effectively, but just because they're running the ball enough, it's setting up these explosive passing plays down the field. I mean, Darnold was perfect through the first half and had 4 just deep touchdowns. It wasn't these little goal line slant routes or whatever. It was all of them were 20, 30, 40-yard touchdowns, and he's just throwing these deep balls on the money. Seattle, an elite defense, and then on offense, these explosive passing plays, and they just traded for Rashid Shaheed, one of the best deep threats in the NFL. This team horrifies me. I think this team, especially, I want to say if they get home field advantage, because we know their home field advantage is so good, but they just never lose on the road. Mike McDonald, since he took over, has made this team the best road team in the league. So unbelievable defense, an offense that just has a ton of explosive passing plays that just added the best deep threat in the NFL, or one of the best deep threats in the NFL, and Rashid Shaheed. This team is my NFC Super Bowl pick right now. I think unless there's some injuries or some stuff goes downhill, I really do think Seattle is going to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl right now. They're so good, man. They're so good. They're such a well-oiled machine, and it just seems like everything's working for them, and they don't have any weaknesses. They really don't. So that's my take on the Seahawks. Obviously, there were some other games this week. Cowboys-Cardinals, that was really funny to see the Cowboys lose like that. Fun stat that I saw, the Cardinals have not won a game on Monday Night Football. I don't know if this is true or not. I hope it's not. They have not won a game on Monday Night Football unless they played the Cowboys. They've won 4 games on Monday Night Football against the Cowboys. They haven't won a single Monday night game against anyone else. That's freaking hilarious, dude. Some other games, the Rams just look almost as dominant as Seattle does, in my opinion. Jags-Raiders went to overtime. That was a fun game, and Brock Bowers is still that dude. Broncos-Texans, very low scoring. C.J. Stroud got pretty brutally concussed in that game. I shouldn't be laughing about that. It was just pretty brutal. And the Broncos ended up tweaking out a win, kind of like I thought they would. Patriots-Falcons was a hell of a game. Drake May is getting sacked a lot. He turned the ball over, but they still found a way. The Patriots are finding a way to win games. Chargers beat the Titans as we kind of expected they would. Lost Joe Alt. That's a big storyline in that one. And then the Niners got a good win over the Giants, and they play the Rams this week. That'll be one of the bigger games of the week. I'm excited to talk about that one. And that was week 9. That was the trade deadline. I feel like I've been talking a million miles per hour, but this is really the best time of year, not just in sports, but especially in the NFL. So I'm really happy to be on this pod talking to you guys. I appreciate you guys being here as always if you stuck with me till the end. Week 10 coming up next week, massive UFC card I'll talk about. And yeah, we're in a good place right now. Sports are great. Love sports. Love the sports world. So appreciate y'all you guys being here. Listen to me as always. I'm going to get out of here. I'll talk to you fools later.